Scott, and thanks for joining me again today for another episode of the RockLove Magazine Podcast, where we celebrate the zine that ran from 1995 to 2001, covering the music of the post-Nirvana era, taking a look at all of the music throughout history that we love, looking for great new music today, replaying never-before-heard interviews from that time because we were just recording those interviews for the written magazine. So, I mean, really exciting stuff we're doing is all a part of this, including what we're doing today, which is another one of our list episodes. And I've asked my son, Ethan, to come back and join me again today. Hey, my boy, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Great to see you. Thanks. And we have a great topic for us today. His, I guarantee you, is much easier than mine. And what I said was, I just off the top of my head, I go, why don't we do one with the year we were born? So mine is 1961, to give away my age, and I never thought about how difficult it was. I did come up with some great things, and there is some great music there. It's this bridge period between that doo-wop and whatnot of the 50s and the British invasion and the whole pre-rock and roll thing. So it's really like this vast chasm of music that straddles everything from the things I'm going to talk about today back to the old standards and everything. So, all right, so let me go first. And I am 1961. He is 1999 during the Rock Love years, so his should be exciting. So my first album in 1961 was released in March of 1961, spent several weeks at #1 on the Billboard charts, the hit from this album. It is still a classic hit today. You'll hear it in movies, you'll hear it in shows, you'll just hear it on the radio. It's a staple anytime you're listening to vintage, whatever they call vintage radio today, retro radio from the 50s and 60s, and that is Del Shannon's Runaway. And like I said at the start of this is all this period that's straddling the rock and roll thing from the 50s, and when standards and crooners ruled, and to that beginning of rock and roll doo-woppy stuff that happened in the mid to late 50s, and then prior to the British invasion and the Beatles and whatnot. And and so Del Shannon was huge. And so I was glad to find that this particular record was from 1961. There's a lot of great tracks on it. The only thing I'll say with most of these selections that you find from this period is sometimes they get a little bit too of a note, meaning that it's one style of music all the way through. There's a couple of deviances, but it's not like this broad range of music that we have on a lot of these albums today. But beautiful stuff. The guy clearly has great production and great song arrangement. And again, you can tell from some of the things he's doing, especially in Runaway and a couple of the other songs on the album, that we are a step away from some sort of change in music and rock and roll here. He's trying to push this boundary, and you can kind of feel it in a couple of the songs on the album, especially in Runaway, though. But I would recommend everybody go check out that first album from the year of my birth, 1961, Del Shannon's Runaway.
I have a question for you about this, because this is before the era, when I started listening to rock and roll. So you just said that they were kind of pushing up against, this big rock, like British invasion with the Beatles and the Stones and whatnot. So why weren't they able to break through? Like, why? I've never heard of the band until you just mentioned them.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't have an answer for you. That's like saying, why was Elvis displaced? Elvis had broken through, but why? He was displaced by the Brit. Everybody, the answer to that question, and again, in my opinion, everybody was displaced by the British invasion. Remember, it's before the Beatles. There's the Kinks, the Zombies. There's all these bands, even a few years before the Beatles hit. And everybody was displaced. Sinatra was displaced. These guys were displaced. A lot of the black artists were displaced. It was like, boom, it was this rock and roll explosion. So that's a great question. So I mean, I guess the answer is that he didn't have it all, whatever it all is, in that. But again, like I say, you go back and listen to this, you will see that you can kind of see the beginning of rock and roll starting here, and that they want to do more, and you can almost, if you go back and listen to documentaries and whatnot from the times, the record labels were solidly in control. You know, the remember, it's like the what's his name, Hesh from The Sopranos, a hit is a hit is a hit. You know, and they were in charge of everything. So so guys like Del Shannon and some of those other big artists of the time were at the beck and call of those, whatever they were called back then, producers. They were hardly particular labels. So, but that's a great question, and that's the best answer I can give you.
Only difference is that like I've heard of the Kinks and or who is it, the Cranberries, you said?
The Zombies.
The Zombies. Like I've heard of them, and I've like everyone knows Sinatra. So even if they, were pushed to the side by the Beatles and the Stones coming onto the scene, it's like I'm only 26 and I still know them. I haven't heard of this other group until now.
Interesting. And speaking of that, you know how much they were pushed aside. They all went and tried to do Beatles songs and what, like Frank Sinatra did these campy, loungy Beatles songs. So Elvis did these campy, loungy Beatles songs. I mean, it was such a big thing. And when you start to kind of think about it, the way you put it, there was so much fear, I guess, of look at what these people are totally displacing us. If you can't beat them, join them. Except their joining them was nothing like what the Beatles were doing. They were just the Beatles songs. So yeah, great comment. Good comment. So, all right, who you got for your first one?
Okay, so this one is actually, when I was going through the list of albums released in 1999, it was a lot less than I was hoping to be able to choose from, which is interesting. I was like expecting Pearl Jam, maybe some Alice in Chains. I think Nirvana had been, he had died by then, if I'm not mistaken. But I was
94, so they're gone. Yeah.
So I was never really big into grunge. Like I liked Pearl Jam 10, but like outside of that, like I don't really listen to Pearl Jam. It's not my thing. So anyway, recently, I'd say within the last 6 months, I've been trying to get into metal that isn't Metallica. And so there's a lot of like bands like formed in the 90s and 2000s. And so one of these bands happened to pop up. It's actually their debut album. It's the self-titled album, and the album is Slipknot by Slipknot, which I listened to again yesterday as I was trying to narrow my list down to 6 albums. And it's interesting because a lot of these bands, like you really get into like, it's not like the 70s or the 60s rock, which we just talked about. It's like you have these like double lead guitars or double rhythm guitars. You have like the double kick drums on the going all the time with the bass, and so it's like it's real heavy metal. Anyway, the reason I kind of got into it the last 6 months is I told Mom I like the idea of going to a metal concert, like a big festival. Of course, the more I think about it, it seems kind of like my worst nightmare, being in a crowd with that many people, but it's something you like the idea of. And so Slipknot was actually a band within the last few months I've started to listen to, and I listened to this album actually for the first time yesterday. But I really liked it. You can start to, it's early, you're kind of pushing up on this like 2000s era of metal where, it's, I think like System of a Down, like post 9/11 did a lot of like anti-Bush type of stuff. And you start to see that in this album. I mean, some of the song titles in the album are crazy too. This guy was going through some stuff. There's one, I think, I'll pull it up here. There's one song called like Wait and Bleed. There's another one called Spit It Out, which you can guess which that one's about. But anyway, the style of music, like once you get past that, like, some of the songs, it's like you can't understand what he's saying. But then you go and look at the lyrics and it's like, all right, this guy's got something to say. Whether it's about a relationship, he's mad at his mom or dad, or he's mad at society. It's really interesting. And I'm really getting into the music. And one last thing I'll say is, Slipknot was one of the groups who I'm getting into. Disturbed, Avenged Sevenfold.
Interesting. So what sent you down this path?
Well, I mean, I go through phases of music where like every few months I'm trying to listen to new stuff. So I recently got back into like, 60s and 70s rock, like Cream, a lot of Clapton. I was into Hendrix. And then I was like, okay, not that I'm going to stop listening to that, but I'm trying to find something new. So I ended up getting into heavy metal. What's funny about like Disturbed and Slipknot is, a lot of these songs you have to, if you can, you pull up the lyrics to them because I like to know what the song is about.
Okay, I got a couple of rock love era bands to recommend to you since you like this now. There was a band we covered a lot called God Lives Underwater. That was huge, so go check them out. And who was the other one? The Canadian band was called I Mother Earth. That had one of my. They have a song called One More Astronaut. That, regardless of the genre, one of my favorite songs of the '90s. So I would go check out those two and see how those do. Yeah, I think that's fascinating that you found yourself going down that path. Did it something have to do with it? You saw Nine Inch Nails within the last year or so? Did that have something to get you going back into this?
No, because I don't consider Nine Inch Nails metal. To me, that's just industrial rock.
Yeah. But it's hard. So, okay, interesting. Great choice. Okay. Do you know, have you discovered if they do anything that's not all amped up? Do they do any stripped down stuff or acoustic stuff or unplugged stuff? Do you know?
I'm sure they have, but I just haven't gotten far into them. I just haven't heard all of their albums yet. For the most part, I like all of their music. But it's funny because if you listen to like Slipknot and Disturbed in particular, it's a lot of like screaming, and so you really have to either decipher what they're saying on your own, or you just pull up the lyrics. And then I think a lot of the post 2000s metal, like System of a Down and Avenged Sevenfold, it's you can understand what they're saying. It's less of just the screaming into the mic way of singing.
Yep. Well, all right. Great choice. Great first choice. You threw me off my stump there. I didn't expect that one out of you, out of left field. So my next one, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit before, things are changing. We're straddling this era in 1961 between the way things were and the way things are going to be a little bit before the British invasion. The biggest stars in the world are Elvis and Frank Sinatra. And as far as Frank goes, by this time, Frank's the man. He calls his own shots. He does whatever he wants. He's a music star. He's a movie star. He's a live on stage star in Vegas. Pretty much everything he's done was turning to gold, but started to have some issues in the late 50s with sales that he had never had before. And being the maverick that Frank was, he liked to call his own shots. He liked to say who was in his band. He was famous for being the least racist person and refusing to do things if it meant things like his black band members had to sleep on the other side of town or whatever. And so along with all that, he's starting to have it up to here with his record, with the various record labels. So he goes to, which I believe is Warner Brothers. He goes to the Warner Brothers and says, I will continue to record for you, but not under this arrangement. I want my own label under its own name. And it's going to be more about artist freedom and creativity. And I'll go out and do my own thing and yada, yada, yada. And they obviously agree because who wants to lose Frank Sinatra, right? And so they start what is today the record label of bands like Green Day. I mean, Reprise Records under the Warner Brothers label, but it was literally Frank Sinatra's label. And so he puts out his first album on his new label called Ring a Ding Ding, and with a big exclamation point on it. And everybody should go and listen to it. What's fascinating about this, compared to all other works that Frank did throughout the 40s and 50s, was, he would always have this mix of music from stuff with horns to ballads and whatnot. And this is all up tempo, and a Sammy Kahn and big band stuff. And it's almost, in a way, when you listen to it, it's a bit of a fuck you to this coming change in music. Maybe he sees it, maybe he doesn't at this point. But it's a master of his craft, still not willing to let go at this stage. And like I said, later on, Frank would be one of the ones most guilty of doing crappy, loungy, cheesy Beatles covers. But at this point, he's not. There's a great version of Let's Fall in Love on here, A Foggy Day. Some of these songs he'd done before, but this is all up-tempo now, and he's bringing everything up. And, like I said, Sammy Kahn and other band leader Sammy Kahn wrote Ring a Ding Ding specifically for this. And And yeah, I just think this is fascinating. This is literally the launch of a label that would become a label that's still today, with all the crap and consolidation in the last 60 years in the music business. Reprise Records is still out there and still has signed to it some bands like Green Day, some of the biggest bands in the world. So yeah, so this is Frank had various eras of his career, right? And this is the clear significant shift in his career at this point to what this next era will be, which is literally the Frank era, where I call the shots and nobody's going to tell me what to do anymore.
So how soon before his era of kind of like the sappy, like, I don't want to call it elevator music, but you know what I'm talking about, like that era of Frank.
Well, I mean, it's still 7 to 10 years. I forget how old he is here in 1961, but he's not a youngster anymore. He's not the youngster with the slick back hair like he was in the 30s anymore. And so yeah, but so he's still, like I said, to me, when he started doing Beatles covers and Stevie Wonder songs, and it was like, okay, Frank, again, to me, that's when it was everybody going, if you can't beat him, join him, because otherwise we're going to get swept away by this tsunami. But the way they joined them was suspect at best. It was trying to join them in their arena as opposed into the arena of the people they were copying. But I love this record. Like I said, going back and looking through my birth year of 1961, this was a toughie because of that straddling of music. And you're looking for things that aren't rock and things that aren't quite doo-wop or aren't so doo-woppy, because that's not my thing. And this is a great record.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but 1961 is kind of like a lot of bands are just putting out, or artists like Sinatra, they're just doing singles, right? They wouldn't do a full, 10 songs.
Yep. Well, that's the way the business was. It was all about singles and 45s with one song on one side and one on the other. Radio airplay, So yeah. Well, that's where the money was. Money was all in singles for years, and then it became about albums, and now it's all about live. Okay, so yeah, so there's my Frank. I think that might be my one that's the biggest reach to the past, although one of mine is a soundtrack, which might be even more so. But yeah, so I'm digging through and I'm finding things for 1961.
That's a tough year.
What you got next?
Okay, so my next one this is, I believe, this band's third album, and I think it's their most recognizable album just because of the cover, which has a porn star on it. And it's Blink-182, Enema of the State. And so
this is one of the great names of all time.
So I was most into Blink-182 in like middle and high school. When mom was driving me to hockey, I think we had 2 of the albums. We still had CDs. We would, Blink-182, I think it was this album, then it was the album after this we used to listen to all the time. So I've always been into it. It's just funny because like their music lyrically, it's like there's no like hidden messaging. It's right in your face. Like the dude is mad at his parents. He's mad at like his friends in high school, and that's why I think it's so relatable to a teenager, is because like he's saying everything that you're thinking. And it has it's probably their most famous song, which is All the Small Things. They play it at every sports game. If you ever hear a Blink-182 song on the radio, that's probably the one they're playing. But it's this kind of like punk rock, like a lot of punk rock, like some of these other groups like Sum 41 I could never really get into. I think Blink-182 had a good stretch from like mid 90s to mid 2000s where they like a bunch of singles on their albums. So I think just because of longevity and because of the amount of hits they were producing, I was able to get more into them in my high school and middle school years, and it's just because it's relatable.
I mean, the thing I'll say the most about them is Travis Barker is in that club of the day the music died people in plane crashes. He's lucky to survive it, but you had Richie Valens, and then you had the Leonard Skinner guys, and I mean, he did, like, I don't know what it is about rock stars and plane crashes, but it seems to be a recurring thing, or helicopter crash, whatever he was in, and he survived it. But he is also an amazing drummer. I think he's, because of the type of music it is, that he's not recognized enough for his drumming chops. So yeah, good choice. I mean, they were another band that during those Rock Love years, they were really big. They were at every festival we covered. They were playing. They were at the Warped Tour. They'd be at the radio shows, and we saw them multiple times.
What's funny about this album is their previous two albums. I think there's like, if you go through the track list, there's maybe one or two songs on their first two albums which are recognizable. But this is like their first album where it's like I think they have three #1 hits on it. So it's whether they're become, I don't know if they had a change of producers at this point or they're just catching their stride, but this is like starting to become the peak era of Blink-182, at least from what I can gather.
Interesting. Yeah, no, good stuff. No, that's a good choice. And a solid three-piece too. I mean, three pieces are really hard because you have to fill all that space with, just bass, guitar, and drums. So it's a tall order, and they do it well with some great beats too and some great hooks. Good choice. Good choice. So, I talked about doo-wop, I talked about Frank a little bit, I talked about Shannon and whatnot, and then there was the way black music was changing also. So black music is also going through these drastic changes in the 40s and 50s from and through jazz and on to what would become, the Motown, the Berry Gordy sound and whatnot going forward. And you start to get the first inklings of all that in 1961 on the Miracles. This is their second studio album called Cookin' with the Miracles. And it is one great, I mean, they are Motown songs, but it's almost like pre-Motown. It's one great pre-Motown song after another. That's the Way I Feel, which Berry Gordy himself wrote. Smokey Robinson has a bunch of songs on here that he wrote. And it just moves really quickly. It's a short album. Songs were only 2.5 minutes back then. So some of these albums were over in 30 or 34 minutes, not like, CDs that would be 75 minutes long or as much as they could pack on things. But this is a collection of 10 great songs. There's a Gershwin song on there too that they do. And, and it's also feels like it's before Smokey became the front man for the band. It seems more like this is the Miracles as opposed to Smokey and the Miracles. And you can really start to feel and see in this what's about to come. Again, it goes along with this theme I have of this wave that's about to crest from the old and tower over into the new.
I'll have to check that one out. I know Smokey Robinson. I've never heard of that album before.
Go check it out. You'll hear, like I said, the early signs of what's coming, with the Motown sound. It's a little bit still in the 50s, but it's like, again, it's 1961. So it's on this crest of, and I would imagine we'd have to talk to a historian, which may be a great idea for another podcast, a historian who can tell us, were these bands and whatnot, were they all aware this early on? Because remember, you don't just break overnight, right? You work at it beforehand. So in 1961, all these British invasion bands are starting to form and practice and come up through shitty, crappy clubs over in Europe and everything. And was it enough of a scene going on that these bands all started to hear that and know and feel, and like I said, see the wave coming at you from behind, and what's your response to that? So, which would be a question I would ask somebody. But like I said, everybody I'm choosing so far seems to be in this, not quite a holding pattern, but a moving pattern of where they were to where they're going to be. At first, as I said, when we chose this topic, I was a bit afraid, but I'm glad with the way it worked out. And wait till you see my last three. I think are all actually powerhouses that everybody will need to listen to.
Okay, you ready for my next one?
Go for it, baby.
Okay, so this is another one. This is this band's first album, and it's Showbiz by Muse.
Oh, there you go. Go for it.
I think they actually only have, I think there's one hit that if people listen to the album, they would probably know, which is Unintended. But this is to me like Muse. This album, like their first three albums, I think are perfect, and then the fourth album is perfect. But you're starting to see like they're moving into more of like the pop.
The arena band thing, they're just embracing it.
Yeah,
It's
they're
like what's
embracing.
happened to Coldplay today.
Yeah, and but anyway, this album, the first three albums are perfect, and they could really just be one album for all I'm concerned, based on just like how they sound. It's like if you ever listen to Muse Absolution, which has like Time Is Running Out, Stockholm Syndrome, Hysteria, this is, you can start to see that album in their first album. This is very, I think, more subdued. Like it's a little less rocky than Absolution and what's their second album with Plug In Baby? I forgot what that's called.
With the yellow cover, I forget the name of it. Yeah, with the yellow cover. Yeah,
Origin of Symmetry.
thank you.
So you start to see like in this first album, like okay, he's kind of soft rock, little bit of like industrial influences maybe from like early and mid '90s. But then when you listen to the next two Muse albums, he really leans into like more of that heavy rock, distorted guitar sound. This first album, the only difference to their other albums is that it sounds very raw. That's not a bad thing. It's just, there's, you don't have like the distorted guitar and like super fast drumming that you get in some of the newer Muse albums before they
Yep,
went into that arena scene.
yep. This is okay. So here, let me tell you let me find my track listing. Okay, so I think people know more songs than you'd think on this. Sunburn and Muscle Museum. I bet you people who just know Muse will know this, and people who know the era will know this because those were also um, radio. Those were radio play songs on that album. Yeah, so I think more people will know songs from what's the name of this album? Showbiz, right? Yeah, Sunburn, Muscle Museum. Yeah, but I agree with you. This is a great album. It's not. It's a little less produced than what their stuff is going to become as it goes on, which I think is a great thing, actually. Unintended is still probably to this day their best ballad. You can slow that down and do anything with that song. You're getting all of Dominic's bass riff. Dominic's the bass player, right? You're getting all of Dominic's bass riffs and everything in this, and yeah, and it's a sign of things to come. I mean, I'll see if I can dig up the Rock Love article on this, but we made two of the bands we made the biggest deals about early on in the magazine of the big British bands were Muse and Radiohead, and this was one of the reasons why when it launched. So outstanding choice.
And I'm sure you remember, Muse was, well, my first concert was a festival at Shoreline, but Muse was the band we were there to see. So I Muse was my first concert, even though I think forgot who else was playing. It was like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. Is that what they're called?
Yep, yep, yep.
They were there. That was the only other band I remember.
What was it? A radio festival?
It was some summer festival at
Oh,
Shoreline.
Summerfest, yeah. No, they're funny. They're so great live. And then there's the story which I've told before. When Ethan was, how old were you when we did this in France?
7.
7. So when Ethan was 7, we were in France on a family vacation, and I had to get away from everybody every morning for a little bit. So I would go into town on my own and go to this coffee shop and get a coffee and a croissant. And I would always look at the newspaper. I can't say read it because it was all in French and I didn't speak French. But I was just trying to keep up on. I think we were in one of the Gulf Wars or something at that point, and so just trying to keep up what's going on. And on one of the last days we were there, I open up the paper and there's a picture of Muse, and I didn't know what it said or what it meant or anything, because I didn't speak French, but there was a reason why they were in the paper. So I ran home and took it to my sister-in-law, your Aunt Mary Ellen, and said, because she speaks French, and I was like, what does this say? What does this say? And she said, it says Muse will be closing Le Festival de Nîmes tonight in the city of Nîmes at this 2,000-year-old Coliseum, which is fucking cool. So We had tried to get tickets. It was near impossible because we didn't speak French. And finally, the cleaning lady shows up, and we stick her on the phone, and she helps us get these tickets, which then we went and picked up at a record store. And in between what a great day this was. In between seeing that show in a 2,000-year-old like Roman Colosseum in the middle of town, in the middle of Nîmes, France. Then we stopped before that in Chateau Neuf de Pape, which was on the way, and went into the caves and wine tasted. Remember that? And oh, what a great day. But yeah, the thing I've said before is that was the show, that Muse show, where like I learned that music is worldwide. Because it was us and 25,000 Frenchies, and they all knew every word to every song, and they weren't just singing it in English. They knew what it meant, and they had the same excitement and everything that we had, and it was like this total breaking of the language barrier and of the everything barrier, the way music does to bring us people together. And so that is always will be one of my favorite concert experiences.
I believe that they were on tour for their fourth album with Starlight and like Supermassive Black Hole. So that's kind of what I was talking earlier. I think that's their last best like near perfect album. But you're starting to see they're starting to get into that more of like pop arena music, you know, kind of playing for the hits type of thing.
Well, and that album, that was one, you hate when this happens to music, but that was one of those albums that was so overplayed you got sick of hearing it for a while. Like really enough with Knights of Saladian and, it was like, over and over and over. And it was great, but, you just you don't want to hear it on their terms so often. You want to hear things on your terms, which is what's great about music today, even though I miss a lot about radio and whatnot back then. But wow, outstanding choice. Great band, great memories. Seen them multiple times. We saw them in Orange County once, Chloe and I, or all of us go, or what was, huh? Yes. All of us? All of it, yeah. So we went down there. That was a cool amphitheater. So yeah, there was a while where we were, because of Rock Love and discovering them through the magazine, we were so into them. We were literally chasing them worldwide, right?
And their music, especially their first like 3 or 4 albums, really hold up.
Totally.
I don't really their new stuff, but all their older stuff is, it's still perfect.
Totally. I listened to it today when I listened to stuff, like I listened to a lot of live concerts on YouTube today. And when it gets to theirs, like I'm usually skipping songs that aren't on those first 4 albums. So I totally agree. Outstanding choice. Alrighty. What am I on? My 4th one. Okay, my 4, 5, and 6, I think, are powerhouses. So, like I said, who are the biggest people in the world? Frank, Elvis in 1961. Smoke, the miracles haven't become yet, but, some contingent of these people within the black music scene were. But in jazz, there was one man who was the biggest star in the world, and that was Miles Davis. And so Miles Davis put out this album in 1961, which is called Steamin' with the Miles Davis Quartet. And this is a really cool, freaking funky ride. This is like the ultimate cocktail hour album that you want to have on in the background. He's doing everything from Dizzy Gillespie songs to Rodgers and Hammerstein, Thelonious Monk. I mean, this is a beautiful piece of music. And, still to this day, no matter who you listen to, there's nobody who can get the sound out of their horn like King Miles could. There's something very cool about it when you listen to it. You can tell the people behind it are all cool cats, as they said back then. John Coltrane is on this. I mean, this is like, let's see, John Coltrane, who else plays on this? Philly Joe Jones, who's a famous drummer. I mean, this is like a royalty type album. I bet you this is the type of thing that like white parents in the 60s hated this shit, and their kids listening to this stuff. And, it's that black heroin jazz music or whatever they referred to it. And, which I have no idea why, because it's beautiful and it's great for, even like I can't imagine putting this on and like having my grandparents not enjoy this if I didn't tell them who it was, and just like I said, the Rodgers and Hammerstein song that it starts off with is I never heard that song in that way. So yeah, this is cool. Like I said, I mean, Miles was the shit, and so you know, in his own way, like Frank Sinatra, he's anti-system, anti-label. He's like a lot of these guys were so troubled by the system of the record industry of those days that's the torture that comes out in a lot of their songs. That's why they leave to go to their own labels, or they move to Europe, or they just become recluses and whatnot. So yeah, Miles Davis, it's Steamin' with the Miles Davis Quartet. Go check it out.
I will definitely check that out. And I don't. You just mentioned that some people might have referred to it as like black heroin music, but it's like you can put on jazz and get stoned to it.
Absolutely, no, it's great. No, I mean that, and that's the way racist white people referred to jazz overall. That it was for that it was for blacks and Mexicans on heroin. Back then they considered weed to practically be heroin. So they meant both, I think, in a lot of ways.
I was just looking fairly young. He was only 65.
Yeah. Well, he was a big drug user, big drinker, big smoker, but a genius, a total musical genius, And there are a couple of great documentaries out about Miles too that are worth everybody going to check out.
If how was his style of jazz changing from like through the 50s and now into the early 60s?
He like Bird and a couple of the others. He's much more free form. Again, I'm not a musician, so I don't know anything about music technically. But a lot of it sounds to me like he's playing with the with time beats and time changes, and he's coming in and out of things at different times than what seemed customary for jazz at the time. It's a very Miles Davis music overall, but especially I think this album is very hard to put into a typical jazz box because it doesn't fit. He's really starting to continue to experiment, and like I say, he's doing these classic songs, and Broadway songs even, but taking them into different places. And a lot, again, there's just something about the tone he got out of the end of that trumpet with that thing he put on the I forget what it's called, on the end of the trumpet, that gave him that beautiful sound. But and so few people can achieve that. So but the other cool thing about this album is this album came from this group of recording sessions that actually happened before 1961, but that was so prolific and so successful, they got 4 albums out of that one recording session, and this is actually the 4th album. So, and I did not have time with all our research and all the podcasts I do and everything to go back and listen to the others, but I bet they're just as good.
For me, about the 90s, in particular 99, and choosing music, you have a lot of different genres. So I had metal. Muse is kind of, I don't know what kind of rock category you put that in, but that's not. Yeah. And then you have punk, and then you also have hip hop. And so this one is, the album is actually titled 2001, but it came out in 1999. It's Dr. Dre.
Okay. Okay, yes, you'll have to educate me on, because I know very little about Dr. Dre. So let's hear.
Famous album. He has like 2 of his biggest hits, or at least radio hits, are on this one. But I really like 90s hip hop in particular, like Dr. Dre, early Snoop Dogg, Tupac, Biggie, because a lot of it, you don't have this kind of like now a lot of rap and hip hop is, you have the rap, and then behind them it's like this techno, very kind of overproduced, in your face music, and it's less about the rap. This is like clearly, in this album in particular, and a lot of 90s rap, it's about what he's saying. And so and behind him, the music, it kind of sounds like they have a band playing. It's not a DJ. It's like there's drums, and there's one of the songs has a guitar riff in it. So it's really different hip hop than we're used to hearing these days, because it's their parents grew up in that jazz era, which you were talking about. So he is clearly just in the music influences from black jazz artists, black R&B, and so it's a different type of hip hop, and that's why I think I really like it.
Interesting. Like I say, I don't know enough about him musically to speak about, although other than to say he was also a great producer, which is clear. He took this record label and made it huge. You know, I mean, everything he touches turns to gold, it seems like. So, you know, he's a creative soul and a great business person and has great people around him. And yeah, I mean, even though I know little about him, I know who he is, right? And so that's part of the thing with that time, your time period of your birth also is the celebrity of it all too, and especially with rap is becoming more mainstream, the celebrity of it, and even people who are thought of to be whatever they would call it, thug, gangsta rap, whatever you call it, with guys like Dr. Dre were becoming acceptable. Especially, what year were were Tupac and Biggie shootings?
That would have been before this, like
Yeah, yeah.
90.
So after that, especially after that, it kind of like opened everybody's eyes up to after this happened to okay, what is this stuff that's people are willing to kill each other over, right? And so to again, even if you didn't know the music, you knew who the players were because everybody was so in the news and they became celebrities and their lifestyles and everything. And so yeah, I will have to go and check out this album and explore them. Again, I listened to some of this stuff during the Rock Love times, but I've listened to very little rap overall over the years.
You know, we just talked about in my last group with Muse how like they start to change. Them, it was probably like closer to 2008, 2009, where they lean into the like trying to just find a radio hit for the album. And this, I think, is the last Dr. Dre album, at least that I know of, where it sounds very raw. Like a lot of his albums after this kind of feel like, okay, he's leaning into, he's got producers telling him, hey, we need like these effects in it. And so you lose the aspect of having like a band behind you while you're rapping, which is interesting.
Yeah, I was talking to one of the musicians. You know, we're trying to do live interviews on the podcast also. So I did one with a live musician recently, with a musician on a live show recently, and you know, and he was saying you can once you figure out the formula, it's very easy to write into the formula. So you have to challenge yourself not to do that. You know, because you don't know most musicians and most artists don't want to keep repeating what you know the same thing that everybody loves. I mean, some may capitalize on it just to do it financially or whatnot, but I think creatively and artistically, they all want to do something more. And so, you know, and so you see with a lot of these bands, almost all of these bands, what that peak is, that jump the shark moment kind of is when they figure out the business, and then it kind of becomes a little more about the business on the other side than when it was just about being a struggling musician on the upside. So. Yeah, interesting stuff. All right, I will go back out and check Dr. Dre. All right, you ready for me to go about as far away from that as possible? Although, in some regards, this influenced rap because a lot of samples and stuff from rap come from famous stage and Broadway recordings. So this was the biggest selling stereo. Back then they had to have a separate chart for stereo music because most things were recorded in mono, one track versus stereo in multi-tracks, right? And so Billboard for many years had its own best stereo songs and albums track. But the biggest selling stereo album of the year in 1961 was music by Leonard Bernstein and lyrics by Stephen Sondheim, the soundtrack to West Side Story. And everybody knows it, whether you know you know it or not. Everybody knows this. They know the songs. You know the bump, 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 and all throughout it. I will say that while I loved it, also I found it as I was re-listening to it the other day, preparing for this, so frenetic and so constant. Like dun 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 dun, dun, it just never stops. The upbeat, high beat symphony. It almost got to be too much. But again, you could see why it's so big. It's like I said, it's Bernstein and Sondheim coming together. This album spent 54 weeks at number one, which meant pretty much for that to happen, that everybody in the country, regardless of what you like or whatnot, you're buying it and you're getting involved in it. And it, you know, and then this comes after the original cast recording of the song. So this is just the music, you know, and like I say, this is you know, Leonard Bernstein at his best, from One of the Great Things. A lot of people say this was the longest running album at #1 in history, although because of that stereo and mono listing, I think most current album charts would say that Michael Jackson's Thriller is that. But this album was like the whole year I was born. This album was up there and into my first year. And it's like I said, this beefy orchestration that they do, and all the horns and all the brass, it's just like constantly coming at you, which I guess is right, because it's about a gang thing, and so it's always happening and always coming at you and always getting ready for the next clash and next battle, and you totally feel that in this music. So,
But you've just listened to it isolated, but you haven't watched the movie recently, right?
no, not at all. No, I just listened to this isolated, and I didn't even go back and listen to the other one with the songs. Just to hear the orchestration, and I mean, you don't need any of the other because that's all in your head. Like I said, everybody pretty much knows this music, and so when you hear this, you hear it. And when you hear the like you see the fights and the pre-fights and the staging and the knife shit and all happening in your head, and so it's like that's how big it was that it propels you into just like reliving it right away, and I guess that says all you need to know about it right there.
Funny, I will go and listen to the soundtrack on its own. I watched the original West Side Story, which is what you're talking about, for the first time a few years ago, and I could not get into it. It feels outdated. This is like
It is.
and actually haven't seen. Spielberg did a remake of it a few years ago, and I haven't seen it, but it got good reviews.
It was good, yeah.
But it's the 60s for like movies. Like there's a lot of great movies, and there's a lot where that's like, and not just in this movie, I don't remember it well enough, but there's a lot of movies in the 60s where the music is like they're trying to do too much with it. Like even in Lawrence of Arabia, I think there's a few scenes where they go a little too far with like the dramatic orchestral music.
Yeah, well, go back and listen to this and tell me if this isn't the poster boy for that, because that's exactly what this is. It's so over the top, and it's like it goes up to the top and stays there. And that's why I said, even after a while, I'm like, okay, do I want to finish it? But I had to finish it for talking about it. And, but you can tell it's great. But again, yeah, it's a lot. Like I'd want Miles Davis on in the background before I'd want this on in the background if I'm picking one instrumental to the other. But again, because so much of, if you just took out all the stuff and just broke it down to the melodies and everything, everybody knows these things. So it's hard. They're hard to ignore.
And Hollywood had in the 60s, I think there was this, thing where a lot of movies are trying to like be super dramatic, and so there's more music, more effects, and then
like this big bombastic music, like dun, 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 so over it's like what like you say, you watch some of those now, and it's like, oh my god, the music is so over the top campy and and ridiculous that they wouldn't do that now. Although look at some of the music now is pretty over the top and ridiculous and overly loud, but this thing, I mean, again, to be able to be on the charts in any category for over a year means that the popularity of it is leaking outside of that category. So I imagine this was, especially in the US, was like a national hit, this album.
I mean, in the movie won Best Picture too, which I don't know if that's aged well, because it beat out Judgment at Nuremberg, which I think is a more important film. But who knows what the Academy was thinking at that time,
As who knows what they're thinking today, that's a whole nother podcast topic. So, okay, what do you got next?
Okay, how many do I have left?
You got 2, I've got 1.
Okay, so I've got, let me think, because I've got 3 left, but I'm going to choose 2 of them.
Here's 2. If we have time, we'll squeeze in your last one.
Okay, I'll do this one, because this is probably the best album from '99, at least from what I've heard. And so we've talked about this group before. So the album is The Fragile by Nine Inch Nails. I don't know how well you remember that one.
Very well.
But it has I listened to it yesterday. It's almost 2 hours long. It's I think, I'm guessing when it came out, they had like one disc, disc one and disc two. Of course, now you just listen to it on a like Spotify or Apple Music, and it
Right,
just
right.
shows, but it shows disc one and disc two on here. Anyway, so I got to see Nine Inch Nails for I think the first time a few months ago in Seattle, and they sound almost exactly like the album. It's like just their music is to me is timeless. Um, and I've said before that if you asked me to name a Nine Inch Nails song, I could name like three or four, like just off the top of my head. But if you play me any Nine Inch Nails song and don't tell me who it is, I could tell you that it's Nine Inch Nails. So if you like go through the soundtrack of this album, like or the track list, like I don't recognize any of the songs just by the name of it, but then you listen to it and it's like it's Nine Inch Nails. There's not really a whole lot you can say because his all of his music is like almost just perfect, And
All you need to say about it is it was good enough for Johnny Cash. So that's all you need to know right there.
it was particularly the first side of this album, the first four songs, like something about it just pulls you in. Um, and it's like that. I mean, every Nine Inch Nails album is like that. Like even his newer stuff, which I've been hesitant to get into because I just always think that when older groups and artists release new stuff, it's like, do you really need to do that? But from what I've heard, it's been pretty good. But this is another great album. I think this and Showbiz by Muse, I think are the two best albums from '99.
Definitely up there. Definitely up there. So I think about Nine Inch Nails a lot the way I think about Metallica a lot, which is I don't rush to pull their albums out, but I would try to never miss them when they came around live because they are two of the best performing acts, and Trent is an amazing showman. Atticus too. The whole band, although a lot of the band members change other than Trent and Atticus, but they put on a great show. They're responsible for some of the most iconic shows of all time, like the Woodstock '99 or whatever. The show in the mud is just like the most famous, fabulous, wonderful thing to watch from afar. I'm glad I wasn't in it. Um, but again, I've never seen them where it's not been like you said. They do amazing replicate. Remember, these albums are so well produced. I won't call it overproduced, but they're very well engineered and produced. And so to be able to take that studio product and present it on stage, excuse me, and present it on stage in a live setting is an amazing thing. And they do it flawlessly. And, to watch him bang around on stage and flail at the keyboards and break keyboards and throw shit around. And like I say, it's all an act, but it's a fabulous act. And he excels at it. And then what's the best part of all of this is, he's one of the best film scorers in all of Hollywood now. So, I mean, look at how he's morphed into music in another great way.
And what I love about this album, and not just this album, but really all of Nine Inch Nails, is you can put on any album. And like you just said, you don't really go out of your way to listen to them. But for me, you can put on any Nine Inch Nails album and it's going to be good. Like, it's not like some bands, it's like, oh, I'm going to listen to this album so I can hear, these three or four songs. To me, you don't listen to Nine Inch Nails to hear the hits. I mean, he's got hits, but it's like you're listening, it's an experience.
Totally.
And
Total experience.
one of the cool things they did at the Seattle show last year was and so at the main stage at whatever it's called, Key Arena or whatever they're calling it now, Climate Pledge Arena, they had this like curtain in front of the stage, so the band is all behind this curtain. So we were in the back, so from a distance you can't tell, like, is there something like in between the band and the crowd, or are our eyes just off? But they actually had a curtain up, which is kind of funny.
For the whole show?
For most of it, yeah.
So the crowd can't see them or only sees it sort of like gorillas?
It was translucent,
so yeah, like gorillas with yeah.
Yeah, so you could see through it. And then, most concerts, on the screen they have the band and it's like, they cut between the drummer, the guitarist, the singer. But the cameras are all pretty stationary. This one was funny because they had a guy going around with like a handheld camera. It's like Soderbergh's out on the stage, and so he'd go from the drummer, then he'd like run over to Trent, and then he'd go over to Atticus on the keyboards. It was really fun.
Oh, that's cool. No, great stuff. They're a great, great, great band in concert. And yeah, no, like, I've never seen anybody attack keyboards either, like the way that both of them, that they attack those keyboards and so aggressively and violently. And like I say, it's all part of the stage show and everything, but they're so perfect at it. And, you know, there's not a lot, I told you about God Lives Underwater earlier. They're kind of industrial-y, so we'll see what you think of them. But there's not a lot of industrial, quote unquote, industrial type of stuff that I liked. But I always loved Nine Inch Nails. I also liked another band called Skinny Puppy, which you should go check out. But yeah, but Trent's the master of it all, and to think about how he's built this music career, now morphed into this next phase of his music career as a older guy in his 50s or whatever he's in now. It's remarkable. So great, great, great performers. Alrighty. My last one is by a master. Let's see, is this chart peak position? I'm surprised it's only peaked at number 14. So one of the most recognizable voices in the world. He was one of the traveling Wilburys. And in 1961, this is his what, second album, I think it is? Second, let's see. This is the debut studio album by Roy Orbison, the guy with the highest voice in the land and one of the biggest crooners, and the guy who probably most inspired Tom Petty more than anybody. It's got Only the Lonely on it, Cry, I Can't Stop Loving You. It's kind of like one single after another when you listen to it. But the thing about it is, um, it's the first time that you hear this voice, and he has this voice. It has zero power in this voice. He gets right up to the microphone like this, only the known, and but he's able to hit this pitch in a soft manner that I don't know of any male singer throughout history that's been able to do what he does. And especially you just start to hear um, the first notes of Only the Lonely, which is a song everybody should know because it's in movie after movie after movie. And it's like you can tell that the guy is special. And again, back then it was something nobody had heard done like that before, especially a guy with such a high voice and such. It's no more than it's just high. It's this tone that he gets. It's high and it's deep. It's just fascinating. There's been nobody like that since. And then when you think about, like I said, cutting later on to when we had the greatest supergroup of all time, the Traveling Wilburys, which is Tom Petty and George Harrison and Jeff Lynne and Bob Dylan and Roy Orbison, his high voice is what's making all those other four lower voices work. And so when you listen to Handle with Care and those kinds of things, it's Roy Orbison that's really driving the upper range of that makes it all sound so beautiful. But a fabulous crooner, a fabulous voice, the strangest hair you ever saw, and it got more strange. Probably a wig as he got older. Check out pictures of him. But again, this is somebody that in 1961 you can see this guy is like trying to straddle this thing somewhere between the 50s and what's coming in the 60s, and as well as the rockabilly Buck Owens sound of country style music that would come in the 60s also, and he's trying to go and straddle and figure it all out. And but in a lot of ways, like the Miracles who I spoke about earlier, this is just somebody who, when you heard the voice, you knew it was him. It was just like with Frank, you knew it was him. Like with Miles Davis's trumpet, it's him. It's like the thing about these people from this era, from my birth year, was that there's some real iconic historical things, people here, and what they represented in their particular lane. So yeah, so if you're not familiar with Roy Orbison, go check him out.
Well, it's interesting just listening to this now is there's like one similarity I can take from 1961 and 1999 is in 61 you had these artists who were kind of figuring out like, okay, there's this scene going on in England that's clearly going to become something, so we're trying to figure out what to do about that. And then also, we're going into a new era. And then in 99 you're coming like not you'd correct me if I'm wrong, but you're starting to come out of like peak grunge era, and you're getting into like more pop,
Yeah,
punk
I
rock.
would say it's more than that. It's you've come out of the peak grunge era, and from the time Kurt Cobain died until about this time we're talking about, your birth year, um, the labels struggled to find what was the next big thing because what they wanted was another grunge. With grunge, they found a genre that they could chase. In the old days, you chased a band, you chased an artist, you chased a voice. But now you found this genre, and then it was like whoever fucking sounds like that, go get them and sign them and get them in the studio and get their friggin' record out and get them on the road. And all of it sold, and all of it pretty much became popular. And so they're trying to do that again after the death of Nirvana. And remember, there's still Soundgarden and there's still Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam and Screaming Trees and these other bands, but when Kurt died, Kurt was the day the music died for grunge, and yeah, so they're spending those next 5 years between the power pop thing of and punk of Green Day and the power pop thing of Weezer and the Dishwalla and Collective Soul and the Verve Pipe and those bands trying and so there is no genre because that was like a once in a lifetime thing that could happen. And so what the labels didn't have was anything to really stick their claws into in that way. So yeah, so then you get to this period in 99 where between the rap stuff and the punk stuff and the industrial stuff and the metal stuff, everybody's trying to within their lane, try and be that next thing and see if it can push out of the lane to be the genre that they're all going to chase. And you see it because they're looking for as many Green Days as they can find and as many, as many of these Nine Inch Nails like band. How many who's the next Metallica that we can find? And it's because again they're trying to chase a genre instead of trying to chase good music or good artists, just because they got lucky in the late '80s and early '90s with this grunge thing. And very lucky. I mean that will not happen again.
But with like just looking at comparing it to 1960, once the Beatles and Stones came along, and then you had like Zeppelin and the Who and all those bands, it's like kind of feels like rock found its groove, so to speak.
Yep.
And then I think in '99, and then even today, there's not as much rock. I mean, it's just not as popular, I think, especially amongst younger generations. But even like my first artist I talked about was Slipknot, and like post 9/11, you can start to see, okay, they're starting to get more into like the anti-government, anti-right wing Bush thing, where before it was about like, girlfriends and wives and all that kind of stuff.
In a lot of ways, music responds to society in extremes, the way society moves extreme, from the middle out and back to the middle and then back out. Well, music does the same thing. So a lot, the response to doo-wop might be English rock and roll, and the response to that might be X, and the response to that might be The Cure and Depeche Mode, and the response to that might be grunge. And so everything is begetting of the next thing and because everything's coming out of these next things, and history both leans on itself and repeats itself, especially musically, and so you'll constantly see that through these eras of these bands trying to, to figure out and break out and fight this industry. Remember, the whole thing changes from the time you become this quote unquote struggling artist trying to find your way to the time some business, a label, decides to sign you and take you under their wing and in quote unquote invest in you and put money into you. And that changes the whole dynamic of the thing. So now you're always in this tug of war and this just like with the movies and filmmakers and push and pull between the people with the money and the creators. And in music, it's definitely no different, and it's even more pronounced. And when you think about political lyrics and anti-racist lyrics and anti-societal problem lyrics and whatnot, music is famous for that. So yeah, so your birth year is a definitely changing time in that regard, like 1961 was, because again, this so the grunge thing, the day the music died in 1994 was when Kurt Cobain died, and so it was like a repeat of the Buddy Holly thing in a way.
My last one, I was choosing between two albums to do, and one is a album and one's a movie soundtrack. But because we're both movie fanatics, I decided to go with the soundtrack, and that is the soundtrack to American Beauty,
Woo! Good choice.
which is very like there's a lot of so Thomas Newman, he did the soundtrack for it. He's done the last movie I think that I saw that he did the soundtrack for was 1917, which is very different because that's leaning, that's a war epic. You're leaning into the kind of overly dramatic aspects of music and film, which we talked about with West Side Story. But American Beauty is funny because it's almost like stoner music, the background. It's kind of, and it's funny because you're coming out of, to me, the 80s and early 90s for music and film is the worst because had all these people who are like, we have to lean into the techno, like Depeche Mode, Duran Duran era and put it into film. So you watch a movie from the 80s and it's like, it's ruined by this like synthesizer. It's like, no, Depeche Mode is great on their own. We don't need it in the movie. But starting into the later 90s, I think a lot of these artists who are composers kind of got away from that and found their stride for better, I think. And so American Beauty, which is a great film, but like
Great film.
it's not, don't think about the music, but then you go and listen to the soundtrack and it sounds great. And then you watch it with the movie, which I watched again within the last year. And they go together. The movie needs the soundtrack and it's very light. I call it almost stoner music because I think it's not like blasting in your face, it's hypnotizing almost.
Interesting. I will have to go back and listen to that. It is a great movie, one of my favorite movies. It's quite disturbing in a lot of ways, especially towards the end and everything. And I love that takeout scene and whatnot, and the takeout in the drive-through lane. But a great movie. And then, there's two ways I look at music in movies, and either they're like West Side Story, they're so overpowering that they take on a life of their own and sort of become their own entity, or and I mean for good soundtracks, or in the case like what you said, they go with the film so well and really only work, in some cases only work well with the film, or you have to go out of your way to listen to it aside from the film to get it as a piece of music. And that's how I view this, because I would never have thought of this musically or whatnot, but I guarantee if I went back and watched the film and paid particular attention to the score underneath, and then becomes obvious, because look at the thing is a best picture, and it's best picture all around, from the script to the acting to the cinematography to everything about that movie had best picture on it. So,
And it was if you've ever listened to the soundtrack for 1917, which I think on its own is Thomas Newman's best work he's done for film, totally different. So like he's clearly been able to adapt over however long he's been around, 4 decades probably at least, to go from very subtle music in movies to over the top as needed.
yep. All right. Excellent. Great choice. Great choice, and a great, great, great film that everybody should go check out again. So, who's in that with him? Was that Robin Wright Penn is in that?
Oh, Annette Bening.
Annette Bening. Right. Oh, what
Yep.
a great movie. Oh, she was great in that too. So that is the ultimate dysfunctional family movie right there. So good choice. All righty. Hey, thanks for doing this again with me today. Shall we do it again still? We'll
Yep.
come up with a new topic. Okay, I'll bring my son Ethan back. He'll join me again.